Good morning, PT on Ice crew. This is Dustin Jones, faculty member with the Institute of Clinical Excellence. I teach modern management of the older adult with my partner in crime, Christina Previtt. We just kicked off week one of our third cohort. So this first week was about ageism and screening. Awesome discussion, really awesome cohort. I'm looking forward to the next 7 weeks with them as we're going to dive deeper into some of these concepts we talk about on this podcast. Next cohort is September 23rd, ptonice.com if you're interested in that. More importantly, though, right now, virtual ICE is open. So you all have probably heard, the other faculty mention this, but every week, one of the faculty members gets on the horn, presents their content more in an interactive fashion. It's a presentation, but more of an interaction. There's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of Q&A. Happens every Tuesday. 52 weeks out of the year. And so you're kind of in this group, this cohort of students and the rest of the ICE faculty where we kind of, dig deeper into some of these concepts and people present their content. It's just a big, well-rounded, overarching, avenue for you to gain consistent, solid content that you can apply, to your setting. So you can sign up for that until June 26th. So get on it like Blue Bonnet. That's at ptonice.com as well. So today's episode is about reserve, a practical framework for your patients. So if you all have not picked up on this, the ICE faculty, the ICE world talks a lot about barbells and CrossFit, strength training, which are all beautiful, lovely things. But there are some black sheep of the ICE family that are more of the endurance mindset or the endurance junkies, the ones that love to run far, to run long, or to bike far, to bike long. And I'm one of them. I'd say Jason London is another one, and Mike Eisenhart. We're kind of the black sheep of ICE in terms of some of the more, endurance type activities. But Mike, you all know Mike. He has some amazing things to say about several different topics. But one thing that he talks a lot about is a concept of endure, which is one of the principles of the APHPT. He actually read a book that I have right here called Endure, Mind, Body, and the Curiously Elastic Limits of Human Performance. He read this book. He mentioned it at the ICE Sampler that was in Vegas back in April, and he ended up giving it to Jason London. Jason London, teaches the injured runner course and the bike fitting course, and Jason just sent it to me in the mail. I haven't got to read this yet. But it really got me thinking about the limits of the human body and the human mind and how that impacts performance. And it jarred my memory to one of my favorite podcast episodes ever from Radiolab, which is titled Limits. That was, I think, published in 2010. But it kind of dives into some of the concepts that I am going to assume are discussed in this book. But I was listening to that podcast as I was driving to do an evaluation. So this is the first time I was going to meet this person. I had about a 35-minute drive, so I was just really geeking out about that Radiolab episode and just thinking about, man, we are capable of so much more than what we perceive in our minds, and just thinking, how can I relay that to my patients? How can I build up their capacity, physical capacity, but also mental capacity to be able to really push the limits and just progress in so many different areas? And I walk into the house and I do the evaluation, and you easily realize that there are limits. There are limits to our capacity. There are limits to our physical ability. There are limits to our cognitive capacity. And in this patient interaction, it was very clear. This individual was in the hospital for a urinary tract infection. They were basically bedbound for 4 or 5 days because they didn't get up and walk much at all. And many of you all see this, that they come home, hey, Meg, good morning, or good evening, where you are in Australia. But they come home from the hospital, just absolutely wiped out, very weak. They likely lost a good bit of muscle mass. It's just a rough situation. Well, his wife is dependent on him. So they come home and they're kind of in this fragile situation, realistically, to where he's having a really tough time doing some of the things that he needs to do on a daily basis for himself and then for his wife. And it got me thinking about, what is this individual's functional limits? What is their limit? And then when you look at how he's moving, he is right up there to the top. So he is functioning at a pretty high percentage of their max effort, if you want to say that. And it reminded me of something Christina Previtt talks a lot about with her clients. Christina Previtt teaches modern management of the older adult. with me, and then owns a gym up in Canada, Stave Off. And she will kind of portray the importance of strength training to her patients with a scenario of, let's say, you have to pick up your groceries. Let's say the groceries, roughly are 20 pounds if you're carrying, 2 bags. What if your 1 RM deadlift, for example, or loaded carry is 25 pounds? Well, in that moment, when you're just doing the simple task of getting your groceries and taking it inside, you're performing that in 80% of your 1 rep max effort. Anyone that's ever lifted a weight, has tested their 1 RM or has worked out at 80% of their 1 RM knows it ain't easy. It's challenging. It's difficult. But Christina sells what she can do by saying, I can make that much easier. I can increase your capacity. I can make your 1 RM better and bigger and stronger. So whenever you go to the groceries, it's much easier and you can do things a whole lot better and more efficient. She sells her programming in that way. But I want you all to realize that almost all of my patients in the home health arena, but probably many of your patients, for most of you all that are in outpatient physical therapy, a lot of your patients are operating very close to that 1 RM level, to that max effort. They are functioning at a high intensity, if you will, with some of the simplest things that you all wouldn't even think about, like walking, like getting up out of a chair, getting out of their car, getting off the toilet, being able to stand long enough to fix their oatmeal, orange juice, and cut their banana every morning. Some of these things that we take for granted, some of our older adult patients, it can be very, very challenging, and it is a high, max effort. And so when we talk about that situation, I want us to really grasp the concept of reserve. So back to the title of the episode, reserve. So the difference between your maximum capacity, what you are capable of doing, and the effort or the demand of that activity that you're currently performing. So you have this kind of buffer zone, this reserve, that if you need to, you can tap into that reserve and rise to the occasion of that activity or whatever demand that is. So just think of that kind of, if you were to do like a 2-line graph, you got your reserve up here, your capacity, and then kind of where you're at in terms of the effort or the demand of that activity. With a lot of older adult patients, there is not much of a buffer zone. So what do we want to do in those situations? We want to increase reserve. We want to increase people's capacity, what they can do, physically, in all the different domains that we talk about. And as we do that, we can lower the demand or the effort needed for said activity, but we can also make that activity maybe a little easier. And we'll talk about how we can do that. But that's something I want you all to think about when you're working with your patients. How can I increase capacity? We talk a lot about that on this podcast through strength training, interval training, whatnot. But how can you make that activity, the effort that they have to put forth for it to complete that activity? How can we make that a little bit lower as well? It's definitely an and not or scenario. They're not mutually exclusive, but we can impact both in different realms. So let's kind of cover some of the different realms of reserve that Christine and I like to talk about in the course. But you could probably take this concept or this framework to so many domains of life, but I want to talk about 2 main ones. The first one being a functional reserve. So when you hear functional reserve, if I said that, to anyone in the medical field, they're probably going to think of some type of lung test or, something more related to one of the organ systems. But when you put your PT hat on or your movement hat on, and I say functional reserve, I want you to think about, movement. Think movement in terms of, what are they capable of doing in terms of movement? And then, what's the effort that they are trying to perform that movement at currently? So how do we build that functional reserve? So obviously we increase their capacity through strength training that we talk about, power training. We can do that. We can do interval training, aerobic training, some of these things that the Fitness Friday folks talk about every Wednesday, every Tuesday, and probably every Monday as well, and throw in a Thursday. Every day we're talking about how we can increase capacity in some way, shape, or form. We've covered that plenty, but I want you to think about how can you lower the demand of the activity for that person in the functional or movement realm. So, if you increase capacity, you're automatically going to make, that effort a little bit easier. But I want you to think about lowering the demand of an activity. Now, whenever we talk about this in the PT world, it can be kind of a controversial issue because inevitably it always comes up. What if we make that person dependent? What if we try and do some type of modification or introduce some type of assistive device to make an activity easier for them? What if they become dependent on that cane, that walker, that bedside commode, whatever it may be? And I've definitely been in the boat where I don't want to make my patients' lives too easy. I want them to have some type of challenge to build some type of strength and capacity and resilience. But after being in home health, for 5 or 6 years now, it's not that cut and dry. We have to really consider, what if we lower the demand of an activity by introducing something like a single point cane or a walker or some type of assistive device that gives them the dignity to be able to perform said activity, that gives them the ability to get up out of a chair a little bit easier so they have the capacity to do other things that they care about? What if it just makes their quality of life a whole lot better, even if I run the risk of making them dependent on that assistive device or whatever it may be? So I want you all to think about that. Engage that with your patients. It's a conversation that you're going to have with them. See what's important to them. See what they want to be able to do. But sometimes we want to lower the demand of the activity to make their life a little better. And if that means giving them a walker or a cane, I am perfectly fine with that. Something else you can think about is home modification. Sometimes you can make recommendations about how someone's home is set up that can make the effort needed for a particular activity a whole lot easier. Let's say, for example, maybe moving their bedroom to the same floor as the bathroom, for example, or moving rugs or moving furniture, different things that you can think about to make the home a easier, safer environment for them to move around, to be able to lower the demand of that particular activity. Also, strategy is something that we can talk about with our patients. What if you talk to them about some strategies in terms of resting for a certain period of time while they're performing an activity? What if you told them, okay, when you're going to try and cook your breakfast, for example, what if you just stood up, did your thing for a couple minutes and then you sat and rested for 30 seconds to 45 seconds? What if breaking up your work intervals allowed you to be able to endure the full length to create a meal? That's kind of, in the OT world, they do a lot of that energy conservation techniques, but we can as well. So that's something that I want you all to think about in terms of lowering the demand or the effort of an activity. It's not bad. It can be good in a lot of situations. So that's functional reserve in the movement realm. Now I want you to think about cognitive reserve. Now Meg Lowry is watching right now. I was going to mention her anyway if she wasn't watching. But cognitive reserve, when we think about that, I'm just going to read this verbatim from a website that I was researching the other day. An important concept that is crucial to the understanding of cognitive health is known as cognitive reserve. You can think of cognitive reserve as your brain's ability to improvise and find alternate ways of getting a job done. Just like a powerful car that enables you to engage another gear and suddenly accelerate to avoid an obstacle, your brain can change the way it operates and thus make added resources available to cope with challenges. Cognitive reserve is developed by a lifetime of education, curiosity, to help your brain better cope with any failures or declines it faces. Many of our older adult patients, there's not a lot of buffer zone between where they're operating at a cognitive level and what they're capable of doing. We can increase capacity. So this is where Meg Lowry comes in with the Clock Yourself app. If you don't know Meg, you need to follow her on Twitter, and she's on Facebook as well. Download the app. But it's a great way where you can build cognitive capacity while getting movement in as well, and it's a fun way to work with your patients. So check that out. But the whole principle is challenging the brain, and we can challenge the brain and challenge the body at the same time. It's crazy. I know we always kind of do them separate, but we can do them together, and Meg is a great resource for that. So challenging people's cognition is going to increase capacity, but I want you to think about, you can potentially lower the demand or effort for an activity to make things, a little better for that patient. And so for the outpatient people, this may not be as applicable for you, but for me in home health, people in SNFs or acute care, we can simplify tasks. We can reduce steps. We can make the environment less distracting, make it quiet. isolate people so there's not as many distractions around them. We can, give them signs or give them cues to perform an activity, so we can lower the effort or the demand of that activity in terms of the cognitive realm. So those are just a few examples that I wanted to get you all thinking about reserve. How can we increase people's capacity? We talk about that a lot, but as we increase people's capacity, their effort is going to go down for certain activities, but we can also do different things to lower that demand of that activity. And it's not always a bad thing. And in the older adult population, it can be a very good thing. So that's some food for thought. Reserve, a practical framework for your patients. Let me know what y'all think. If you have any other ideas or examples or how you think about reserve, go ahead and comment in the Facebook post. I'd love to, get a conversation going, because this is something that I'm starting to really think about a lot with my patients, whenever I'm working with them in the home. So that's it for today's episode. Don't forget virtual ICE. All right, June 26th is when that's going to be. You're not going to be able to sign up for. I'm not sure when the next sign up is. We're opening it up roughly every quarter. But yeah, sign up for that. June 26th, $29.99 a month, 52 lectures, one every week, and you get surrounded by a solid community of people. Also, the fourth cohort of Modern Management of the Older Adults starts September 23rd. So if you're kind of on the fence, you've been thinking about that course, hit me up. Email me. Shoot me a message on Facebook. You can go to ptonice.com and find more information on that. But we'd love to have you join that course. Christine and I have put a lot of effort into that, and we're very excited to share a lot of that information with y'all. So y'all have a lovely Wednesday, and I will be back with y'all in a couple weeks.